In the vast and turbulent universe of Warhammer 40,000, there are few figures as enigmatic and complex as Perturabo, Primarch of the Iron Warriors. Known as both a master tactician and an unyielding force of bitterness, Perturabo's story is one woven with betrayal, resentment, and dark genius. His journey from loyal son of the Emperor to one of the most feared traitor primarchs of the Horus Heresy is a tale marked by manipulation, grueling battles, and an insatiable desire to prove himself. Born on the harsh, war-torn world of Olympia, Perturabo was cast into a life of conflict from the very beginning. Unlike his more favored brothers, he was raised in a realm of survival, strength, and relentless competition, which shaped his calculating and unforgiving nature. His abilities in siegecraft and warfare were unparalleled, but his disposition was colder, his ambition more vengeful. With a mind like a steel trap and a heart hardened by countless betrayals, Perturabo was destined to be a formidable leader and eventually a scourge upon the Imperium he once swore to protect. At his side stood the Iron Warriors, a legion as relentless as its Primarch, known for their mastery of siege warfare and their brutal efficiency. They would follow Perturabo into the depths of the Eye of Terror itself, seeking retribution and release from the contemptuous treatment they felt at the hands of the Imperium. This alliance between a bitter Primarch and a grizzled, battle-hardened legion would forge a legacy of terror and destruction as Perturabo and his warriors exacted their revenge across the galaxy. In this story, we explore Perturabo's rise and fall, from his early days on Olympia to his pivotal role in the Horus Heresy, the betrayals he endured, and the fearsome reputation he and the Iron Warriors cemented. The story of Perturabo is one of both strategy and fury, and through his lens we uncover the dark nature of loyalty, honor, and the cost of retribution in a universe where there is only war. The key figures surrounding Perturabo paint a picture of immense ambition, deep-seated rivalry, and complex loyalty. At the center is Perturabo himself, the master of siegecraft, whose genius and obsession with perfection drive him to extreme measures. As a Primarch, Perturabo was created by the Emperor of Mankind to lead the Great Crusade in uniting humanity across the galaxy, yet his loyalty is tested and ultimately broken. Through his story, we see how isolation, bitterness, and unrecognized merit can transform a loyal servant into a formidable foe. As a Primarch, Perturabo wielded immense power, but his approach was markedly different from his more flamboyant or charismatic brothers. Cold, logical, and uncompromising, he shunned the praise and admiration that seemed to follow other Primarchs. This disposition created a sense of distance between him and the rest of his kin. His tactical acumen made him an invaluable asset to the Emperor, yet his cold personality and the brutal tasks assigned to him and his legion meant that he was often isolated from the favor others enjoyed. At his command was the Iron Warriors Legion, a force of space marines who matched their Primarch's grim determination. The Iron Warriors were renowned for their brutal efficiency and unmatched siege warfare skills. They bore the brunt of many grueling campaigns, forced into protracted battles that other legions avoided. The Iron Warriors shared Perturabo's bitterness, feeling unappreciated and even exploited by the Imperium. Their loyalty to Perturabo ran deep, as they saw in him a leader who shared their hardships and resentment. One of Perturabo's notable contemporaries was Rogel Dorn, Primarch of the Imperial Fists. Dorn, a paragon of honor and fortitude, became a symbol of what Perturabo could never achieve within the Imperium. Known for his mastery of defense, Dorn's style of warfare was the inverse of Perturabo's siegecraft, leading to an intense rivalry. The Emperor's visible preference for Dorn as his fortress builder only stoked Perturabo's resentment. Each time Dorn was praised for his defenses, Perturabo viewed it as an insult to his own capabilities, pushing him further into isolation and resentment. The relationship between Perturabo and the Emperor was complex. Although the Emperor recognized Perturabo's talent, He rarely celebrated or acknowledged his Primarch's sacrifices, instead assigning him grueling tasks that kept him at the edge of the Imperium's most contested worlds. Perturabo came to view these assignments as proof of the Emperor's indifference, or even scorn. He saw himself as the Emperor's hammer, forced to endure endless campaigns and unimaginable losses, while his brothers were celebrated for less grueling feats. Another figure closely connected to Perturabo was Horus Lupercal, War Master of the Great Crusade. Horus's ambition and charisma allowed him to form bonds with his brothers, and he could see the anger festering within Perturabo. Understanding the power of Perturabo's genius and the loyalty of his legion, Horus approached him with promises of recognition and freedom. Horus skillfully played on Perturabo's wounded pride, nurturing the bitterness that had been planted by the Imperium's indifference. Horus knew that a strategist like Perturabo could be crucial in his rebellion, and Perturabo's legion was perfectly suited for the brutal sieges that would define the Horus Heresy. Alongside these larger-than-life figures were the captains and warriors of the Iron Warriors Legion, whose loyalty to Perturabo was absolute. The Iron Warriors were as much forged by Perturabo's leadership as he was shaped by their loyalty and resilience. Through their campaigns together, they came to see Perturabo as more than just a leader. He was their voice, expressing their shared resentment and frustration. As they waged countless wars for the Imperium, the Iron Warriors and their Primarch grew united in their belief that they were being used as tools, a necessary but unappreciated component in the Emperor's designs. In the shadows was the Cabal, a mysterious and ancient alliance of Xenos entities that sought to manipulate events in order to shape the future of humanity. Their influence over the Horus Heresy extended subtly, using individuals and circumstances to push key figures like Perturabo towards betrayal. The Cabal's understanding of Perturabo's bitterness and Horus's ambition made them indirect yet influential participants in the fall of the Iron Warriors. These players set the stage for Perturabo's tragic arc. A Primarch of immense skill and potential, he was ultimately spurned by an Imperium that failed to recognize his worth. Surrounded by figures who would either ignore, exploit, or manipulate him, Perturabo's story reflects a deep conflict between loyalty and resentment, culminating in a betrayal that would echo across the stars. Through these key figures and factions, Perturabo's journey from devoted son to traitor Primarch becomes a cautionary tale of what unfolds when the extraordinary are dismissed, ignored, or underestimated. The seeds of Perturabo's discontent were sown long before he took up arms against the Imperium. His journey began on Olympia, a world dominated by mountainous terrain and fortified cities that often clashed in brutal, prolonged wars. This upbringing shaped his worldview, instilling a relentless drive to master warfare and fortification. In his youth, Perturabo saw only strife and distrust among the people of Olympia, where alliances were fleeting and betrayal was commonplace. From these harsh beginnings, he developed a cynical outlook on loyalty and power, traits that would later come to define him. After being discovered by the Emperor, Perturabo was placed in command of the Iron Warriors, a legion already hardened by grueling campaigns. However, the initial union between Perturabo and the Iron Warriors was not without its struggles. His strict, often brutal leadership style clashed with his new soldiers' morale and independence, yet over time, he molded them into an elite siege force. To him, war was a relentless grind of precision, where victory was achieved through mathematical inevitability rather than the heroics or glory-seeking that others, like his brother Primarchs, seemed to relish. His philosophy was simple: efficient, calculated warfare without regard for honor or fame, but with an emphasis on absolute control and adherence to strategy. As the Great Crusade continued, the Iron Warriors were assigned some of the most unyielding missions. Their role as siege specialists meant they were often sent to subdue heavily fortified worlds, grind down rebellious populations, or bring entire planetary strongholds to submission. This exposed them to the most horrific aspects of warfare: constant attrition, entrenched enemies, and overwhelming defenses. Unlike many other legions, who would win wars with precision strikes or swift assaults, the Iron Warriors found themselves embroiled in prolonged conflicts that sapped their resources and morale. In the early years of the Great Crusade, the Iron Warriors took pride in their duty, bearing these burdens with stoic resilience. Yet, as the years wore on, they began to sense a pattern. While other legions received support, praise, and recognition, the Iron Warriors were treated as expendable. They were rarely celebrated, their achievements overlooked by the Imperium they served. This feeling of neglect festered, gradually transforming the loyalty of the Iron Warriors into resentment. Perturabo, meanwhile, watched as his brothers were praised and elevated by the Emperor. He saw Primarchs like Robut Guilliman and Rogel Dorn being given pivotal roles, entrusted with building the Imperium's infrastructure and defenses, while he and his warriors were relegated to the bloody task of battering down fortress worlds. He began to see his assignments as proof that the Emperor regarded him and his legion as mere tools, rather than integral parts of the Imperium. To Perturabo, this was not only a slight against him personally, but a devaluation of his legion's sacrifices and the lives of his warriors. The Emperor's failure to acknowledge the sacrifices of the Iron Warriors created a rift between Perturabo and his father. As a Primarch, Perturabo was endowed with extraordinary intelligence and strategic foresight, yet he was rarely given the chance to prove his worth beyond the battlefield. The lack of opportunity to showcase his talents in more constructive, visible ways only deepened his frustration. This sense of unfulfilled potential, combined with the relentless grind of the Great Crusade, weighed heavily on Perturabo and his legion, creating a bitterness that would later be harnessed by forces seeking to tear the Imperium apart. To add to the legion's burdens, the Iron Warriors were sometimes assigned to police the actions of their fellow legions. They were used as a tool of reprimand and discipline, which did little to endear them to their brothers. Such duties put them in opposition to other Astartes, and in one notable instance they were even ordered to crush a rebellion on a world where Imperial forces had been defeated. To the Iron Warriors, it felt as if they were constantly cleaning up the messes left by others, without any appreciation or recognition from the very Imperium they were working to protect. This series of grueling tasks and relentless warfare led to a decline in morale among the Iron Warriors. Perturabo, in response, became more unforgiving and demanding, imposing harsh discipline and swift punishment on those who questioned his methods. This uncompromising approach, while effective in maintaining order, further alienated him from his legionaries. Despite their loyalty to him, many began to view their Primarch as a cold, calculating leader who saw them as tools in his grand designs. Perturabo's inability, or perhaps unwillingness, to form personal bonds with his warriors deepened the divide between him and his legion, adding a layer of tension and distrust to their already strained relationship. The resentment within the Iron Warriors reached a breaking point on the planet of Olympia, Perturabo's homeworld. When he returned to Olympia as its conqueror, he found the world in a state of rebellion. Its rulers, fearing his wrath and perceiving him as an outsider, had risen against Imperial authority. To Perturabo, this betrayal was a personal affront, a rejection by the very people he had once sought to protect. In a fit of rage and frustration, he ordered a brutal crackdown on Olympia, purging its cities and eradicating its population in what would come to be known as the Olympian massacre. This atrocity marked a turning point for Perturabo and his legion. The massacre on Olympia severed the last emotional ties he had to any world or ideal outside of cold strategy and warfare. In the wake of the massacre, the Iron Warriors were left haunted by the blood they had spilled at their Primarch's command, and Perturabo himself was further isolated. With Olympia reduced to ruin, and his legion transformed into an instrument of cold vengeance, Perturabo's path to betrayal was almost complete. As the Olympian massacre became known throughout the Imperium, it cemented the Iron Warriors' reputation as brutal, heartless soldiers. The event served to alienate Perturabo and his legion even further from the Imperium, reinforcing their belief that they were mere tools for the Emperor's grim purposes. For Perturabo, the massacre was both a lesson and a scar. It demonstrated the depth of his bitterness and the lengths to which he would go to enforce his will, while also marking the point of no return. In his mind, he was now truly alone, having forsaken both his ties to the Imperium and his past. As the Great Crusade reached its zenith, the Imperium stretched across the galaxy, binding countless worlds under the Emperor's rule. Yet behind this vast achievement, fractures began to appear, and tensions simmered beneath the surface. Whispers of dissent and the seeds of rebellion were quietly taking root. This unrest, often hidden from plain sight, would soon erupt into a devastating civil war, and it was in these turbulent times that Perturabo found himself drawn to a new cause, one that promised recognition and freedom from the relentless grind of the Imperium's endless wars. Horus Lupercal, War Master of the Great Crusade and the Emperor's chosen heir, had already begun his descent into treachery, swayed by forces beyond mortal understanding. Horus's charisma and deep insight into the psyche of his brothers allowed him to identify the discontent brewing within several Primarchs. Knowing that each Primarch possessed a unique set of grievances against the Imperium, Horus approached each in a way that would appeal to their specific frustrations, ambitions, and insecurities. With Perturabo, Horus offered validation, understanding, and, most tempting of all, a promise of vengeance against those who had belittled him and his legion. To Horus, Perturabo was a critical ally. His Iron Warriors, with their mastery of siegecraft and endurance in grueling battles, were an essential force for the conflict Horus planned to ignite. More importantly, Horus recognized that Perturabo's bitterness toward the Imperium and the Emperor made him an ideal candidate for rebellion. While other Primarchs struggled with internal conflicts and wavering loyalties, Perturabo's frustration with his role in the Crusade had only grown stronger. Horus deftly exploited this, presenting himself as a brother who could empathize with Perturabo's struggles and who would offer him the respect and position he felt he deserved. Under the guise of camaraderie and kinship, Horus shared his vision with Perturabo. He spoke of a new Imperium, one freed from the dogmatic rule of the Emperor, where the Primarchs could shape their destinies without interference. The ideals of honor and loyalty, which many of their brothers held dear, meant little to Perturabo compared to the chance to finally be recognized as the strategic mastermind he was. Horus painted a picture of an Imperium where Perturabo's talents would be celebrated rather than exploited, where he would have autonomy and respect. With each conversation, Horus fanned the flames of Perturabo's resentment, framing their rebellion not as betrayal, but as liberation. Perturabo was not swayed easily. He was a calculating and logical mind, not one to make decisions based on emotion alone. Yet Horus's promises struck a chord within him, resonating with the frustrations he had harbored for so long. It was an alluring offer, but one that required careful consideration. Perturabo understood that joining Horus would mean turning his back on everything he had once fought for, a prospect that carried a bitter irony. For years he had bled and sacrificed for the Imperium, only to find himself cast aside in favor of his brothers. Now, he had the chance to forge a new path, one that would rewrite his legacy on his own terms. The tipping point came when Horus revealed the extent of the Emperor's secrets, including his plans to ascend to godhood, a concept that deeply unsettled many of the Primarchs. This revelation cast the Emperor in a new light for Perturabo. No longer did he see the Emperor as a distant but pragmatic ruler. Instead, he began to view him as a tyrant who saw his sons as mere tools to achieve a divine status. This, to Perturabo, was the ultimate betrayal. The Emperor's grand vision of a united galaxy, so often heralded as a mission of enlightenment, was, in reality, a path to his own deification at the expense of those who served him. With this knowledge, Perturabo's decision became clear. The Emperor had never truly valued him, and his role in the Great Crusade had been one of bloodshed and attrition, not glory or honor. The Emperor's hidden ambitions only cemented Perturabo's resentment, confirming that he and his legion had been little more than pawns in a larger game. Embracing Horus's vision, Perturabo pledged his loyalty to the War Master and prepared his legion for war, not just any war, but one that would tear the galaxy apart and settle old scores against those who had wronged him. Under Perturabo's command, the Iron Warriors set about fortifying their positions and preparing for the grueling sieges that would define their role in the Horus Heresy. They transformed worlds into fortresses, building weapons of immense destructive power and creating elaborate traps to ensnare and destroy the forces of the Emperor. Perturabo himself took personal interest in the design and execution of these fortifications, pouring his genius into each structure with a grim determination. His legion, already hardened by years of brutal campaigns, was more than ready to unleash its full fury against the Imperium. In addition to preparing his own forces, Perturabo also began forging alliances with other traitor legions. The Iron Warriors joined forces with other legions loyal to Horus, sharing tactics, intelligence, and resources. The Iron Warriors were instrumental in the planning and execution of several critical sieges during the Heresy, employing their unique skills to devastating effect. Under Perturabo's guidance, they broke fortresses that had once been thought impregnable, wreaking havoc across the galaxy and leaving a trail of destruction that would be felt for centuries to come. As the Horus Heresy progressed, Perturabo's commitment to Horus's cause deepened. The betrayal of the Emperor and the Imperium had changed him. No longer was he simply a tool of war, carrying out orders without question. Now, he wielded his power with a new sense of purpose, one driven by personal vendetta and a thirst for recognition. This transformation did not go unnoticed by his legion, who mirrored their pre-march's newfound intensity and dedication to the cause. Under Perturabo's leadership, the Iron Warriors embraced their role as harbingers of destruction, taking on siege assignments with a ruthless zeal that bordered on fanaticism. The Iron Warriors, too, underwent a profound transformation. Their once stoic resolve had given way to an almost nihilistic fervor. They saw the Imperium as corrupt, its ideals hollow, and its leaders as hypocrites. Fueled by this contempt, they became an unstoppable force, willing to raise entire worlds to achieve their objectives. Siege after siege, they demonstrated an unrelenting brutality, grinding down defenses with a precision and ruthlessness that left their enemies in ruins. Among the Iron Warriors, a new hierarchy began to emerge, one that rewarded brutality and cunning. Perturabo, once indifferent to personal relationships, began to place trust in those who shared his unyielding outlook and supported his ambitions. Officers who excelled in cruelty and efficiency rose to prominence, cementing a culture within the Legion that glorified unrestrained destruction and a disregard for anything resembling compassion. The Iron Warriors came to see themselves as the true architects of the new Imperium Horus sought to build, a vision in which their skills would finally be valued. In this crucible of war, Perturabo refined his strategies, devising new weapons and methods that would push siege warfare to its limits. He designed the Tormentor, a colossal land raider outfitted with devastating firepower, and constructed fortresses with traps so complex that they became legends among his enemies. Each battle was another opportunity to demonstrate the prowess that had gone unrecognized for so long, and each victory brought him one step closer to the retribution he sought against the Imperium and the Emperor. Perturabo's meticulous planning and calculated cruelty turned him into one of Horus's most formidable allies, a general whose expertise in siege warfare was second to none. His campaigns were marked by cold precision and an understanding of warfare that few could match. As the heresy raged on, he orchestrated siege after siege, leaving devastation in his wake. With each victory, his allegiance to Horus strengthened, solidifying his place as one of the most pivotal figures in the rebellion against the Emperor. In his mind, the path he had chosen was not just a rebellion. It was a reckoning, a chance to prove that the Iron Warriors and he himself were forces to be respected, feared, and remembered. As the galaxy descended deeper into the chaos of the Horus Heresy, the Iron Warriors found themselves entrenched in some of the most brutal and strategically crucial sieges of the war. Under Perturabo's command, they became a legion transformed, forged into an unyielding weapon capable of breaking even the most fortified strongholds. These were not mere battles. They were meticulously planned sieges, each one an exercise in engineering, calculation, and ruthless efficiency. Perturabo brought to life a form of warfare that few could rival, bending all of his intellect and resources to the destruction of the Emperor's defenses. The Iron Warrior's role was clear: to tear down the walls of the Imperium, to grind its strongholds to dust, and to shatter any defense the Loyalists could muster. Each fortress they assaulted was a test of Perturabo's genius, each defense a challenge to his mastery of siege warfare. To him, the complexities of these campaigns were both a necessity and a proving ground, a place to test and refine his relentless approach to war. One of the earliest and most infamous battles of the Heresy was the siege of Hydra Cordatus. This fortress world was a symbol of the Imperium's strength and resilience, with towering defenses designed by some of the most skilled engineers in the galaxy. Capturing Hydra Cordatus was more than a strategic victory. It was a statement, a declaration of the Iron Warriors' strength and their commitment to the rebellion. Perturabo approached the siege with meticulous precision, constructing trenches, fortifications, and artillery emplacements that encircled the Loyalist defenses. For weeks, the Iron Warriors hammered at the fortress, assaulting it with waves of heavy artillery and orchestrating calculated breaches in its walls. Throughout the siege, Perturabo kept himself at the front lines, directing the assault with cold, unrelenting focus. His presence drove the Iron Warriors forward, inspiring them to push through fatigue, wounds, and the unending barrage of enemy fire. To them, each step taken, each meter of ground gained, was a tribute to their Primarch's iron will. Hydra Cordatus fell not to the courage of soldiers or the valor of commanders, but to the precision and relentlessness of Perturabo's strategy. When the fortress finally crumbled, it was a testament to the Iron Warriors' brutal philosophy: victory at any cost, achieved through attrition and sheer determination. As the Heresy progressed, the Iron Warriors were deployed in sieges across the galaxy, taking on some of the most heavily defended worlds in the Imperium. The Siege of Talan, however, would be a defining campaign in their history. Talan was a desert world, its surface scarred and barren from previous battles, and it was here that Perturabo faced one of his most arduous challenges. The planet was heavily fortified, its defenders prepared to fight to the last in a protracted battle that would push the Iron Warriors to their limits. Perturabo approached the siege of Talan with his characteristic ruthlessness, deploying weapons of mass destruction to weaken the planet's defenses. The Iron Warriors launched a virus bomb assault that transformed the once arid landscape into a poisoned wasteland filled with toxic storms and radioactive fallout. This devastation allowed the Iron Warriors to deploy their forces in full, unleashing a mechanized assault that rolled across Talan's poisoned deserts, annihilating Loyalist strongholds one by one. The battle for Talan stretched on for months as the Loyalists dug in and fought back with fierce tenacity. The conflict became a war of attrition, with both sides grinding down each other's resources in a brutal deadlock. Perturabo's forces clashed with the Imperial Guard, engaging in tank battles across the desolate, irradiated sands. The Iron Warriors faced massive casualties, but each fallen soldier only deepened their resolve to tear down the defenses of Talan. To Perturabo, the siege was both a lesson in endurance and a demonstration of his legion's uncompromising resolve. Talan's defenders, however, proved to be equally tenacious, mounting counteroffensives that forced the Iron Warriors into brutal, close-quarters battles. For Perturabo, the campaign became a symbol of the war itself, a relentless struggle with no end in sight, a battle where victory was measured in blood and iron. Though he eventually withdrew his forces, the siege of Talan left an indelible mark on the Iron Warriors. They had suffered tremendous losses, and the campaign's failure to fully capture Talan planted seeds of frustration and doubt. Yet it also reaffirmed Perturabo's belief that only the strongest would prevail. As the Horus Heresy reached its peak, Perturabo and the Iron Warriors were called upon to lay siege to the Emperor's greatest fortress, the Imperial Palace on Terra itself. This was to be the ultimate test of Perturabo's skill and ambition, the defining siege of the Heresy. The Imperial Palace, designed by Rogel Dorn, was the most fortified structure in the galaxy, and its defenses were built to withstand any assault. For Perturabo, this was not just another assignment. It was a personal challenge, a chance to prove his superiority over Dorn, and finally demonstrate his mastery of siegecraft to the galaxy. With Horus's forces gathered, Perturabo coordinated the initial assaults, deploying artillery, siege engines, and specialized battalions to dismantle the palace's defenses. Under his guidance, the Iron Warriors pushed through the outer fortifications, engaging in brutal combat with the Loyalist forces defending the Emperor's seat of power. The siege unfolded in stages, each wave of the assault meticulously planned to test and weaken the Loyalist defenses. Perturabo's forces pounded the walls with heavy artillery, deploying siege towers, massive assault engines, and reinforced infantry to break through the Imperial lines. The siege of the Imperial Palace was a campaign of unprecedented scale and brutality, with each day bringing new horrors to the battlefield. The Iron Warriors dug trenches, erected barricades, and constructed gun emplacements to solidify their advance. They fought in trenches filled with mud and blood, their ranks thinned by the relentless fire from the palace's defenders. Each breach was met with fierce resistance, and every inch of ground was bought with the lives of Perturabo's warriors. As the siege dragged on, Perturabo drove his forces harder, determined to shatter Dorn's defenses and bring the Loyalists to their knees. Despite their relentless efforts, the Iron Warriors met resistance unlike anything they had faced before. Rogel Dorn's defenses held strong, and the Loyalist forces countered each assault with unwavering resolve. For Perturabo, this battle was more than a military operation. It was a personal vendetta, a chance to finally prove himself superior to Dorn. Yet even as he pushed his forces to the brink, the siege of Terra took its toll on him and his legion. The Iron Warriors faced immense casualties, and as they fought, the desperation of the siege began to wear on them, revealing cracks in their once unbreakable unity. The siege reached its bloody climax as the traitors breached the inner walls of the palace, pushing ever closer to the throne room itself. The Iron Warriors spearheaded these final assaults, their ranks decimated but unyielding in their advance. In the chaotic, blood-soaked corridors of the palace, they fought Loyalists in brutal close combat, with both sides suffering catastrophic losses. The cost of the siege became evident as Perturabo's legion was reduced to a shadow of its former strength, the once proud Iron Warriors now a battered force driven solely by the will of their Primarch. In the end, despite their efforts, the tide of the siege turned against them. The arrival of Loyalist reinforcements and the betrayal of key traitor commanders forced Horus to make a final desperate gamble, culminating in his ill-fated duel with the Emperor. For Perturabo, the Siege of Terra was both a personal and strategic failure, a campaign that had drained his legion and left him with nothing but hollow victory and bitterness. The Iron Warriors had sacrificed everything, yet they were left with no reward, no recognition, and no lasting legacy, only the scars of their bloody campaign against the Emperor's fortress. As the Heresy came to its tragic conclusion, Perturabo and his battered legion retreated into the Eye of Terror, where they would become something far darker and more twisted. The Siege of Terra, meant to be their ultimate triumph, had instead solidified their transformation into instruments of chaos and ruin. With their loyalty to Horus broken and their purpose unfulfilled, the Iron Warriors became a legion of lost souls, haunted by the battles they had fought and the bitter legacy of a war they could never win. In the aftermath of the Horus Heresy, the galaxy lay in ruins, fractured by betrayal and scarred by the brutal conflict that had spanned countless worlds. For the Iron Warriors, who had given their all in service to Perturabo's ambitions, the end of the heresy was not a victory, but a bitter withdrawal into obscurity. The Emperor's forces had held Terra, and the traitor legions, beaten and scattered, found themselves retreating into the unknown reaches of the galaxy, pursued by vengeful loyalist forces. For Perturabo, this marked a grim turning point. His ambition unfulfilled, his legion devastated, he now faced a new existence in the lawless depths of the Eye of Terror. The Eye of Terror was a place unlike any other, a realm where reality itself warped under the chaotic influence of the warp. Here, time, space, and matter were mutable, shifting and unpredictable, governed by the whims of the dark gods who dwelled within. For the Iron Warriors, adapting to this hostile realm required a fundamental transformation, one that would sever any last ties to the Imperium they had once served. In this domain of chaos, where entire worlds drifted in and out of existence, Perturabo found both a sanctuary and a crucible, a place where his legion could rebuild their strength while embracing a darker purpose. As the Iron Warriors established themselves within the Eye, they encountered strange new allies and adversaries. Renegade forces, remnants of defeated legions, and even alien warbands prowled the chaotic space, all vying for survival and dominance in this ever-shifting realm. These forces, many of whom had also once served the Emperor, now operated under the influence of the Chaos Gods, their minds and bodies twisted by the dark power that permeated the Eye. Perturabo's disciplined Iron Warriors found themselves surrounded by the chaotic and often maddened remnants of once loyal soldiers and Primarchs, whose allegiance to the Imperium had been torn asunder by their experiences in the Heresy. While other Primarchs like Angron and Fulgrim were swiftly consumed by the Dark Gods, becoming avatars of bloodlust and excess, Perturabo approached his new existence with caution and calculation. He was not one to bow willingly to any master, and he viewed the gods of chaos not as saviors, but as entities to be exploited if necessary. Though he would eventually be pulled further into their influence, at this stage Perturabo remained aloof, determined to retain his autonomy even in the depths of the Eye. He was pragmatic, wary of the corrupting power of chaos, and intent on using it as a tool rather than succumbing to its allure. To cement their place within the Eye of Terror, Perturabo and the Iron Warriors began to construct fortresses across this chaotic domain, fortifications that would become their strongholds in the battles to come. They transformed entire worlds into fortresses of iron and stone, equipped with defenses that rivaled the greatest strongholds of the Imperium. This was a form of redemption for the Iron Warriors, a chance to practice their craft on a grand scale, unfettered by the constraints and expectations of the Imperium. Each fortress was a masterpiece of defensive strategy, a brutal testament to Perturabo's genius and his obsession with perfection in warfare. Over time, these fortresses became points of power for the Iron Warriors, bases from which they launched raids into Imperial space and fortified themselves against the predations of other Chaos warbands. Their strongholds were labyrinthine nightmares, filled with traps, mazes, and overwhelming firepower designed to grind down any enemy foolish enough to launch an assault. Within these fortresses, the Iron Warriors honed their skills, evolving into masters of defense as much as offense. Perturabo's dedication to perfecting his craft continued unabated, and his soldiers became fanatical in their loyalty to his vision, embracing their roles as the architects of war in the Eye of Terror. As the years passed, the Iron Warriors adapted further, embracing the strange powers and warped resources of the Eye to construct even deadlier weapons and fortifications. This was a process that brought them into contact with sorcerers and dark mechanists who plied their trade among the forces of chaos. Through these alliances, the Iron Warriors obtained cursed machines and technologies that would allow them to fight on new levels of destruction. They began integrating demonic engines into their arsenal, massive constructs of metal and warp energy that could unleash devastation across battlefields. These monstrous war machines became symbols of the Iron Warriors' new identity, remorseless, unyielding, and armed with power that no mortal army could hope to withstand. Yet, despite their newfound power, life within the Eye of Terror took its toll on the Iron Warriors. Living in this realm was a constant struggle against the mutating influence of chaos, a place where even the most disciplined minds were at risk of corruption and madness. For Perturabo, maintaining control over his legion was a never-ending task. He instilled a strict hierarchy and enforced rigorous discipline to keep his warriors focused on their tasks, all the while vigilantly watching for any signs of weakness or instability. The Iron Warriors became a legion hardened not only by warfare, but by the psychological strain of enduring life in an unnatural realm. Perturabo, too, was changed by his years within the Eye. Cut off from the Imperium and the Emperor, he fully embraced the role of conqueror and executioner, casting aside any last vestiges of loyalty he may have held. Now he was an architect of ruin, a master of a legion with no purpose but to spread destruction. He became known as the Lord of Iron among his followers, a title that reflected both his indomitable will and his ironclad vision for his legion. He had long since abandoned any desire for recognition from the Imperium. His legacy would now be one of fear, domination, and ruthless vengeance. As the Iron Warriors solidified their power within the Eye, they became increasingly involved in the internal conflicts of the Chaos Warbands, lending their Siegecraft expertise to the struggles for dominance within this fractured realm. Perturabo became both a sought-after ally and a feared adversary, a Primarch whose mastery of warfare was unrivaled among the traitor legions. Many Chaos Lords sought his support in their campaigns, promising him resources, artifacts, or new weapons in exchange for his assistance. The Iron Warriors, however, remained fiercely loyal to their own goals, joining these conflicts only when it served their own interests, and often extracting a heavy toll from those who requested their aid. Over time, the Iron Warriors' reputation grew, and their influence expanded throughout the Eye of Terror. Perturabo became a figure of dark legend, known for his unyielding nature and his legion's ability to break any stronghold, no matter how fortified. His strongholds became refuges for those who could afford his protection and fortifications for those willing to join his cause. The Iron Warriors' strongholds across the Eye of Terror evolved into bastions of chaos, bristling with deadly defenses and thrumming with the power of demonic engines. They were fortresses that only Perturabo's mind could conceive, a maze of steel and hate built to endure any assault and to crush any who dared enter uninvited. The Iron Warriors became known as mercenaries within the Eye, their allegiance driven by their own needs rather than loyalty to any particular faction of chaos. They were hired by warlords, cultists, and traitor marines alike, brought in to break defenses and lead sieges that required expertise beyond the average warband. The price of their allegiance was steep, for Perturabo's mercilessness ensured that any alliance with the Iron Warriors came at a significant cost. Their payment was often extracted in resources, weaponry, or even slaves, anything that could bolster their power and ensure their survival in the harsh reality of the Eye. While they maintained their independence, the Iron Warriors grew ever more entangled in the web of chaos, each pact and alliance bringing them further under the influence of the Dark Gods. Though Perturabo resisted becoming a puppet of chaos, the energies of the Eye and the temptations it offered began to weave their way into his legion. The Iron Warriors, once solely men of iron and discipline, now wielded weapons born of madness and sorcery. They came to accept demonic infusions in their weapons and armor, channeling these powers to enhance their effectiveness in battle. Despite the growing influence of chaos, Perturabo maintained a tight grip on his legion. He tolerated the demonic gifts only to the extent that they served his goals, and any warrior who succumbed entirely to the madness of the warp was dealt with mercilessly. In this way, he walked a dangerous line between power and corruption, intent on harnessing the resources of chaos without becoming beholden to it. Perturabo's willpower and focus allowed him to remain distinct among the traitor Primarchs as a master of strategy and intellect, rather than a slave to the whims of the dark gods. Thus, the Iron Warriors carved out a new existence in the Eye of Terror, embracing their roles as both mercenaries and builders of terror. Through their strongholds and alliances, they spread their influence, creating a network of power that stretched across the Eye. They became architects of chaos itself, unyielding in their vision and remorseless in their methods. Their transformation complete, the Iron Warriors were now an unstoppable force of destruction, feared by allies and enemies alike, their legacy bound to the will of Perturabo, their Lord of Iron. The Iron Warriors' time within the Eye of Terror pushed them to develop new technologies and tactics to match the evolving and chaotic challenges of their surroundings. With no consistent laws of physics and reality shifting at the whims of the dark gods, the Iron Warriors learned to adapt their traditional siegecraft into something far more flexible and devastating. Their innovations became legendary, producing weaponry and machines of war that harnessed both advanced technology and the malevolent energies of the warp. Among their most fearsome inventions were the Obliterator cults, an infamous creation unique to the Iron Warriors. The Obliterators were born from experiments designed to meld flesh, metal, and demonic energy into a single terrifying form. Iron Warriors who proved capable of withstanding the influence of chaos but sought further strength volunteered for the Obliterator transformation. Their bodies were infused with volatile warp energies, allowing them to assimilate weaponry into their very flesh. With the power to morph their bodies into weapons at will, the Obliterators became living artillery, capable of unleashing devastating firepower. Each Obliterator was a monstrous fusion of machine and flesh, endlessly adapting to the needs of battle. This merging of demonic energies with human and mechanical components was not without cost. Many volunteers were driven to madness or consumed entirely by the raw power they sought to wield. Those who survived the transformation, however, became nearly unstoppable on the battlefield, with a physical resilience and firepower that made them a force to be reckoned with. The Obliterators symbolized the Iron Warriors' new approach to warfare: adaptability, brutality, and a willingness to embrace the unorthodox. They were a testament to Perturabo's philosophy of victory at any cost, even if that meant delving into the dangerous powers of chaos. Alongside the Obliterator cults, the Iron Warriors developed the fearsome demon engines, constructs that combined mechanized brutality with the malevolent will of demonic entities. These engines were designed to be siege weapons of unparalleled power, with forms that ranged from massive walkers to skittering spider-like monstrosities. Each demon engine was a fusion of warp-bound spirit and sophisticated machinery, bound by arcane rites and brutal engineering. These creatures of iron and hate roamed the battlefield under the Iron Warriors' command, tearing through enemy lines and battering down defenses with sheer destructive force. Creating and controlling demon engines required rituals and bindings that were as dangerous as they were intricate. The engines had to be tethered to their masters, often by powerful runes and artifacts that kept the demonic essence within the machine in check. Even with these safeguards, demon engines were notoriously difficult to control, with some breaking free of their bonds in the chaos of battle, turning on friend and foe alike. Yet the Iron Warriors embraced this risk, finding in these engines a tool that could turn the tide of any engagement. To the Iron Warriors, the demon engines were more than weapons. They were symbols of their defiance against the natural order and their commitment to evolving as a legion of unparalleled destruction. The Iron Warriors' arsenal was not limited to monstrous constructs and corrupted soldiers. Perturabo and his legion also cultivated an array of devastating siege weapons, refining their arsenal to include tools designed specifically for breaking through even the most resilient defenses. They constructed massive artillery pieces capable of launching shells imbued with warp energy, which could tear through walls and barriers that conventional weapons could not breach. These warp-charged projectiles would displace or distort matter upon impact, often causing entire sections of fortifications to collapse as if consumed by an unseen force. One of their most innovative weapons was the Graviton Crusher, a siege cannon capable of distorting gravitational fields. When fired, this weapon could amplify the weight of its target, crushing structures and fortifications under the multiplied force of their own mass. The Graviton Crushers became a staple of the Iron Warriors' arsenal, symbolizing their mastery over the manipulation of physical forces and their willingness to embrace unconventional methods to achieve dominance in siege warfare. Coupled with their other warp-fueled weapons, the Graviton Crusher allowed the Iron Warriors to devastate fortified worlds with horrifying efficiency. In addition to these advancements, Perturabo also placed a strong emphasis on psychological warfare. The Iron Warriors began to employ tactics designed to break their enemies' morale before ever setting foot on the battlefield. One of the most feared methods was their use of bombardment zones, areas around enemy strongholds that would be subjected to continuous artillery fire for days, weeks, or even months before a siege. These bombardments were meticulously calculated to deny the defenders sleep, supplies, and any semblance of security. The sound of the relentless shelling and the devastation it wrought drove countless defenders to surrender or abandon their posts, leaving the Iron Warriors to take their targets with minimal resistance. The psychological impact of these bombardments became legendary, spreading fear across Imperial forces. Tales of Iron Warrior sieges became infamous, instilling terror among those tasked with defending against them. The fear of their relentless artillery alone was often enough to weaken enemy defenses, as commanders would order premature evacuations or abandon outposts to avoid facing the Iron Warriors' wrath. Perturabo understood the value of fear as a weapon, and his legion embraced these tactics, seeing psychological warfare as another tool in their unending campaign of destruction. To further cement their dominance, the Iron Warriors employed brutal slave labor, capturing and forcing prisoners to build fortifications, transport supplies, and even construct weapons under the threat of death. These slaves were often used as cannon fodder or even shields, marched ahead of the Iron Warriors' assault troops to absorb enemy fire. This grim practice allowed the Iron Warriors to conserve their own resources while breaking the morale of their enemies, who witnessed their captured comrades being sacrificed as pawns. These methods reinforced the Iron Warriors' reputation as a legion with no compassion or mercy, driven solely by their pragmatic desire for conquest. Over time, Perturabo's approach to warfare transformed not only his tactics, but the mindset of his warriors. The Iron Warriors became relentless and ruthless, fully embracing the philosophy of total war. There was no room for glory or honor in their ranks, only the cold, calculated pursuit of victory. This perspective spread through the Legion as soldiers and commanders alike came to see their enemies as mere obstacles to be crushed without hesitation or remorse. To be an Iron Warrior was to embody the essence of attrition and endurance, to view the battlefield as a place where only the most determined would emerge victorious. In this environment, the Iron Warriors honed their skills to a deadly edge, becoming adept at calculating and exploiting any weakness in enemy defenses. They were no longer just soldiers. They were engineers of ruin, builders of fear, and harbingers of despair. Their skills in Siegecraft became almost ritualistic as they meticulously prepared for each assault, studying their targets with an obsessive attention to detail. Each victory was dissected, each failure scrutinized, with Perturabo demanding constant improvement from his legion. The Iron Warriors' brutality and discipline became legendary, and their reputation as masters of siege warfare was unmatched across the Eye of Terror. This deadly innovation and the adoption of cruel tactics solidified the Iron Warriors' status as one of the most feared legions within the Eye. They were no longer just a military force. They were a force of nature, a weapon of attrition and destruction that ground down everything in its path. Through their methods and innovations, The Iron Warriors transcended the traditional role of an army, becoming a symbol of despair and devastation for all who opposed them. Their name became synonymous with unrelenting brutality, their symbol a harbinger of doom. Under Perturabo's command, the Iron Warriors found purpose in perfecting the art of destruction. They were no longer a legion tied to the constraints or values of the Imperium. They had become a new breed, a relentless machine of war bound only by Perturabo's vision of dominance. Their weapons and tactics continued to evolve, growing darker and more insidious with each battle, each siege, each hard-won victory. In the end, the Iron Warriors became what Perturabo had always envisioned, architects of annihilation, bound by no law but their own, and driven by the cold, unbreakable will of their Lord of Iron. As the Iron Warriors cemented their infamy within the Eye of Terror, tales of Perturabo's tactics and the methods he employed became the subject of both fear and fascination among other chaos forces and renegade factions. While some saw him as a master of unparalleled discipline, others viewed his approach as cruelly rigid, a philosophy that left no room for the chaotic fervor that many warbands embraced. Yet Perturabo's strategies were more than just brutal. They were profoundly effective, designed to cripple opponents both mentally and physically. In this way, he forged a unique legacy, becoming a legend of siegecraft and an engineer of despair, with his legacy spreading even beyond his legion. Perturabo's obsession with perfection drove him to seek the unbreakable defense, the ultimate fortification from which no attack could succeed. Within the shifting realms of the Eye, he constructed the Eternal Fortress, an awe-inspiring citadel that represented both his mastery of fortification and his enduring resentment. The Eternal Fortress was more than a mere structure. It was a symbol of his philosophy, a bastion that defied the chaotic nature of the Eye itself. This fortress was a labyrinthine stronghold designed to be the epitome of defensive architecture, with intricate traps, layers of defenses, and vast artillery emplacements capable of annihilating any assault. Every stone, every wall was placed with exacting precision, each corridor built to funnel and disorient any potential attacker. Building the Eternal Fortress was a feat of engineering genius, a task that would have been impossible without Perturabo's strategic insight and obsessive attention to detail. It required immense resources, which the Iron Warriors procured through alliances and mercenary work within the Eye of Terror. The fortress took decades to complete, with each phase of construction carefully planned and executed. Perturabo oversaw the entire process, incorporating innovations and dark technologies that would make the Eternal Fortress a place of pure terror for any enemy. In its depths, Perturabo crafted chambers where foes would face certain death, hallways filled with artillery emplacements, and a command center from which he could survey every aspect of the fortress, making him an omnipresent force within its walls. The Eternal Fortress became both a home and a prison for Perturabo, encapsulating his isolation and bitterness. Here, surrounded by the indomitable defenses of his own making, he found solace in solitude, buried in calculations and plans that drove him further into the dark realms of his own mind. Though his legion shared in the fruits of his labor, the fortress stood as a testament to Perturabo's alienation, a grand edifice that was more monument than sanctuary. Many Iron Warriors viewed the fortress with awe, yet they could not deny the haunting sense of despair that lingered in its corridors. For them, the Eternal Fortress was a manifestation of their Primarch's spirit, unyielding, impenetrable, and relentless in its pursuit of perfection. Despite its defensive might, the Eternal Fortress was more than just a safe haven. It served as a staging ground for Perturabo's campaigns, a base from which he launched assaults into Imperial territory. From this fortress, he could marshal his forces, organize siege operations, and oversee the training of his legionaries. To Perturabo, the Eternal Fortress was a vital component in his vision for the Iron Warriors, enabling him to project his power beyond the Eye and strike fear into the heart of the Imperium. The fortress, with its endless corridors and impenetrable defenses, was a reflection of Perturabo's desire to perfect the art of war and embody the unassailable fortress that he believed was the true essence of strength. However, for all its strength, the Eternal Fortress also symbolized Perturabo's entrapment. His desire for absolute control over his surroundings became a prison, a self-imposed confinement that isolated him further from both allies and enemies. His hatred for the Imperium and his rivalry with his Primarch brothers became obsessions that he could not escape, driving him to fortify not only his surroundings but his own spirit, closing himself off from any hint of change or redemption. In his quest to perfect his fortress, Perturabo had, in a sense, entombed himself within the very walls he had so painstakingly constructed. As time passed, Perturabo grew more disillusioned, realizing that no fortress, no defense, could ever satisfy the gnawing emptiness he felt. His mastery of fortification had become both his greatest strength and his eternal torment, a reminder of the battles he had fought and the betrayals he had endured. His genius in building the Eternal Fortress had transformed him into a prisoner of his own making, trapped within the walls that symbolized his isolation and resentment. Even his closest lieutenants began to see that their Primarch's obsessions were consuming him, driving him further into a darkness from which he might never return. In the end, the Eternal Fortress stood as a testament to Perturabo's legacy, a paradox of both power and despair. It was an impenetrable fortress, a stronghold that exemplified the Iron Warrior's resilience and mastery of siegecraft. Yet it was also a symbol of Perturabo's self-imposed exile, a fortress that shielded him from his enemies but could never shelter him from his own memories and regrets. Here, in the heart of his creation, Perturabo became a figure of both triumph and tragedy, a master of war whose genius had led him down a path of relentless isolation. In the wider context of the 41st millennium, Perturabo's legacy endures as one of ruthless strategy and unyielding discipline. Though his physical presence within the galaxy has waned, the Iron Warriors continue to wage war across the Imperium, their tactics refined and perfected in the unforgiving realms of the Eye of Terror. Perturabo's teachings, his philosophies, and his relentless pursuit of victory have become ingrained within his legion, shaping them into warriors who will never relent, who will siege, grind down, and obliterate their enemies without mercy. Throughout the centuries, the Iron Warriors have carried out Perturabo's doctrine with unbroken commitment, laying siege to worlds and fortresses alike. Their name has become synonymous with despair for those they besiege, a reminder that Perturabo's vision endures through his legion. The Iron Warriors remain unyielding, inheritors of Perturabo's iron will, embodying his belief that strength lies in fortitude and the relentless drive to endure against all odds. The Imperium has come to fear them as the architects of unending war, a legion that strikes without warning, decimates without remorse, and leaves only ruin in its wake. In the chaos and darkness of the Eye of Terror, the Iron Warriors persist as both a cautionary tale and a force of nature, a living testament to Perturabo's grim philosophy. His name echoes across the galaxy as a shadow of dread, an eternal reminder of the consequences of neglect and underestimation. The Iron Warriors, bound to their Lord's vision, continue their unrelenting campaign, guided by a legacy of bitterness and tempered by the fires of countless battles. In every siege they wage, in every fortress they topple, the memory of Perturabo lives on, a reminder that even in the darkest depths, the drive to conquer, to build, and to endure can never be extinguished.